Man, we really spoil you guys. It's another Carolina podcast, second one this week. And I guess it's only fitting because it is the start of football season. It's Friday morning now. Wes and Chris and I wanted to get together and discuss everything that happened yesterday at Media Days, which, for those of you that haven't seen the clips, incredibly eventful. The most eventful South Carolina Media Day ever, I think it's fair to say. So I wanted to get you guys together, get some of your takeaways, and you also got to watch the first 15, 20, 30 minutes of practice this morning and kind of see what you could glean from players wearing not even shells, right? Just helmets and shorts. Is that correct?
Yes. Riveting stuff out there this morning.
Sure. Yeah. But let's start with Media Day.
Okay.
We'll start with yesterday afternoon. Will Muschamp giving us press
I'm getting fired up.
Yeah, Wes can't contain us.
You got to direct me in a specific direction.
That's what I'm here for. That's why I'm your host. I got to keep you guys in line. We're going to start with Media Day yesterday. Will Muschamp press conference at 3 o'clock. Went 43 minutes. It's like one of the longest.
Yeah.
I don't know off the top of my head what the longest is, but certainly one of the longest.
It'd be weird if you did know that. I think.
Yeah. Well, I do remember one. I think it was in the middle of last season. It was one of his Tuesday noon press conferences, and it was all 45 minutes ish. So I don't want to say it was the longest, but one of the longest, and a lot of questions being asked, and in fact ended with Will Muschamp saying, I'm kind of tired of answering questions, so I'm going to go now, and then left, and it was terrific.
I have a note about that, though, because there have been some talks about that. I believe the venerable Steve Fink before that was heard saying last question.
Yeah. He said two more questions, and then last question.
I was just clearing that up for everybody because there was some,
but it was funny.
Oh, some people got angry about it.
Did they really?
That he was
Who got angry about that?
No journalist people. I just saw some things online like, why is Muschamp saying that? Oh, yeah.
Guys, we got to stop getting angry about everything that happens.
No, that's the rule. We have to have anger about
but
it.
But he was in good spirits yesterday. He made fun of Mike Yuva's socks. He called the question asked about Clemson at Media Days a dumbass question, which was my personal highlight of the press conference yesterday. What did you guys take away from 43 minutes of Will Muschamp yesterday?
Well, also wanted to add, he went and then answered more questions. He was at the other Media Day part 2 doing one-on-ones directly after the press conference. So it's not like he was like, I'm done with y'all, and then disappeared.
I just wanted to give himself some time to get over to the indoor facility. We were doing the press conference at Williams-Brice, had to walk down the lawn to get to the indoor facility to continue.
It was a joke, people.
Yeah. It was funny. He was, like I said, he was excited yesterday, and part of it's, I think, because it's the start of football season, but I think you can also tell he's excited about the group that he's got coming back this year, a good mix of veterans that have been around, part of his first recruiting class, and a lot of young, exciting talent.
Yeah, my takeaways were, first of all, relatively healthy. You're always sort of wondering, all right, is there a guy we haven't heard about that the coach is going to say, oh, this guy's out for the entire preseason, or this guy's out for, we don't know if this guy's going to be there at the beginning of the year. A couple of guys that have had off-season procedures that I guess we didn't know about before, JJ and Igbare, and, you look at Keir Thomas, who had an ankle deal, but sounds like both those guys could be fully cleared by, next week, within the first week of practice, I should say. I think they're relatively healthy. We already knew about Jalen Dickerson being out for the year, who he mentioned. Jaquez Searles, that was a note, I guess worth mentioning that he's not sort of cleared yet academically. But I thought, him talking about the ingredients for a championship team, and, I think these aren't things that guarantee that it's going to be a winning season this year, but when he's talking about leadership, he's talking about quality, competitive depth, those are things that if you're going to be good, you probably need to have those two things. It's very hard to have a winning team without those two things. And I think that's something, like you talked about the senior class, that he's you can tell they're special to him for sort of choosing South Carolina when they, could have easily not after a 3-win season when he took over. So, those are some of the things that sort of caught my attention. Otherwise, I'm sure there's probably little bits of information. I feel like a press conference like that, especially a preseason one, there's going to be a lot of coach speak, a lot of just generalities, and then you have to almost just try to glean, read between the lines almost as far as any other information you can get.
Yeah, I think you glean as much from, I guess, how Will Muschamp says the things that he says from what he actually says. You got to play armchair psychologist to a certain extent. Chris, what did you take away from Coach Muschamp yesterday?
Yeah, I think some of the comments that he made just regarding the concerns that he has about the team, I don't think they were surprising. I think he just reiterated some of them. He talked about the offensive line as far as relating it to a concern about the team a little bit more than I anticipated. I mean, obviously we all knew going into preseason that South Carolina is going to be breaking in a new center, whoever that may be. Hank Manos, Chandler Farrell are the most likely candidates. Hank Manos started the bowl game. He played a little bit last year, preserved his red shirt. But Donnell Stanley's moving over. He mentioned Sedarius Huscherson moving over to left tackle. And he didn't say it's a concern, but he mentioned it when questioned about concerns just because he said, look, he can do it. He's one of the strongest guys on the team. He's got the athleticism to do it, but he's also, playing the position for the first time on a full-time basis. And then you're also breaking in a new right guard, whether it's Javon Gwynn, Eric Douglas, MJ Webb, converted defensive lineman was the other one he mentioned. So he spent some time on that, which I figured he would hit on that, but maybe a little bit more than I thought. They do have to figure some of those things out. They have to figure out who their best five is, and then they have to go look for 6, 7, and 8, who those guys would be. And he talked about safety some. That's the position, safety and linebacker. I know they was not happy about how either of those positions played last season. Linebacker, they were inconsistent. They lost Eldridge Thompson, obviously, last year. They're banged up very badly at safety, and they've lost Dickerson for this season. But it feels like they have some guys there. It's just a sort of a question mark going into this year.
I was a little bit surprised, like you were, that he talked as much about the offensive line as he did, and he was asked specifically about concerns. He didn't say that was the area where he was most concerned, but I also think if you're a Gamecock fan and he is highlighting that as a particular concern, weirdly, that's kind of encouraging because it's a group that's returning 3 starters. I think the number that I think I heard, and correct me if I'm wrong here, is that the 3 starters returning on the offensive line have a combined 56 starts, plus healthy competitive battles for the starter position at center and at right guard. It doesn't seem like it's a race to the bottom for either of those. It seems like Hank Manos and Chandler Farrell are both playing well and actually really vying for that spot. Just like it seems like that's the case for the right guard spot. So I think that's encouraging. And all we know about Eric Wolford is that he recruits good offensive linemen, he develops good offensive linemen, and he coaches them up well. And if that's a principal concern for you, I feel like that's a good sign.
Yeah, I mean, they've recruited well. That's something that Muschamp mentioned over and over, just in terms of the changing body types. They're bigger, they're more athletic. I think that's obvious, just the eye test. I mean, if you watch this team practice in, say, the spring of 2016, and then you went and looked at them now, they look like an SEC offensive line or a Power 5, offensive line. So they've gotten, when you've recruited guys like that, you look better. But it's still a concern when you're breaking it. Hank Manos has played a little bit. He started the bowl game. He's played a little bit. Javon Gwynn played in the first game and then went down with a season-ending foot injury. Even Eric Douglas, he's been around a while, but he hasn't played a ton. Chandler Farrell hasn't played a ton. He's played some. And then you got some of the other position moves. So they think Donnell Stanley's best suited at guard. They think Hutcherson can certainly play left tackle. He's got NFL potential, whether he is a guard or tackle. But it's still a question mark.
I had sort of the same thought when Carolina was headed into the season last year. When you feel good enough to move one of your best, most experienced offensive linemen to a new position this year, in the case of Donnell Stanley, if Carolina really thought that center was going to be an issue, that Manos or Chandler Farrell couldn't handle it, they probably would have tried to slot one of those guys in at guard, but they feel comfortable enough with what they think those guys can do that they're able to move Stanley back to that left guard position where he feels a little bit more comfortable. So again, for me, I was curious, or I was interested rather to hear him single that out. One other anecdote that did catch my attention yesterday, when we were talking about leadership, where that leadership is coming from is always interesting. Certainly you have your seniors, you have the guys that were part of Will Muschamp's first class, but 2 guys that he singled out in J.C. Horn and Israel Mukwamu that I think have a lot of excitement headed into the season. These are the sort of prototypical corners that Will Muschamp likes to have, and when he has had, I think y'all mentioned this on the podcast earlier this week, that's usually a sign that the rest of the defense is going to end up being pretty good. He told a story about those guys being out of their rooms past curfew, and when the coaches went to find them, it was because they had, basically snuck back into the Long facility to go watch some film. And, that's the kind of stuff when you have that, from sophomores who they're the leaders in the defensive backfield there. And I think what he said was that kind of mentality can be contagious for the team. I think that's a great sign.
That anecdote will probably be shared for like every game on the telecast this year. I feel like, but no, in all seriousness, those guys are like everything you look for, I think, in a student athlete, both from like the whole talent, blue chip, how do they sort of stack up athletically mindset, and then from a do they do everything the right way mindset, do they work hard, do they do the extra work? And I think not only do those guys drive each other, they push each other, and I think, J.C. Horn, for my money, he's in the conversation at least as one of the most talented, high upside guys on the team. And I think Muschamp sort of seeing that and knowing they came in on the same class, they're the same position, knowing J.C. Horn gets, a lot of the love, and rightfully so, I think is right there being pushed by that and pushing J.C. Horn. And, I think if you're a guy coming in, and we've talked all offseason about, how all those guys, Johnny Dixon, Jamie Robinson, Shiloh Sanders, and Cam Smith, are going to be counted on and needed to, they're going to be needed on the field this year. If you see, the guy, J.C. Horn, who I think they probably all already look up to, and Izzy Muschamp, and see how they work. If your most talented guy in a position group is also your hardest worker, those other guys almost have no choice but to fall in line.
Right.
If you get there and you're a young guy and you see, this guy's good, but he don't really put in the work, then I feel like you're a little more likely, if you're not a self-driven kid, which not every kid's like a self-starter. Some of them are, but not all of them are. So I think having that in your room is incredibly helpful. And, Muschamp, again, and I kind of take him at his word on this stuff because he's generally pretty honest as far as how he feels about the roster. He's admitted, there's some areas in the secondary where they are still a bit thin or inexperienced, but every time he says that in the same sentence, he says, but I feel like we're really talented. So defensive back, that's his position. That's what he's made his name, creating. And I think as long as they avoid injuries, which obviously last year they didn't, that group, I think, could be one that gets better and better as the year progresses.
All Gamecock Central podcasts are recorded with Anchor, which is the easiest way to make a podcast. Anchor gives you everything you need in one place, and you can use it right from your phone or computer, and it's absolutely free. The Anchor creation tools will allow you to record and edit your podcast right there on the app so that it sounds great. Then they'll distribute your podcast for you so it can be heard everywhere, like Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and Google Podcasts, plus many more. You can easily make money from your podcast with no minimum listenership with ads like this one. Download the Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started today.
So unless y'all have anything else about the Muschamp press conference specifically, I think that's a good opportunity to transition into the conversations that we got to have with the players yesterday. The players were available from 4 to 5. I think we probably talked to a lot of the same people. I'm not sure if y'all talked to J.C. Horn, but to go back to that conversation about defensive backs, I talked to Israel Muschamp and Jamias Williams yesterday and asked them specifically about the young guys, and the thing that they both said was just how competitive they were, how hard they were working, already coming in. And, of course, they're going to say that. They're not going to be like, oh, well, so-and-so is really coming in and slacking. But I think really emphasize just how competitive that is, because all four of those guys know that given the depth of the defensive backfield or the lack thereof, they're all going to have the opportunity to come in and play right away. And it sounds like they're all planning on coming in and playing right away, or at least doing their best to do so.
Yeah, I think Muschamp said it many times. He said, these guys were told in the recruiting process, you're going to come in and play. And that was not a recruiting pitch. That was almost like
we have a running back backing up two of our cornerback positions.
Yes, and A.J. Turner jogged out there with the first group at nickel today. So that tells you, I think, that wasn't even a pitch. That was hey, don't come here if you're not ready for that. Like, come and be ready. And we'll see how it plays out. But I think all those guys are talented, man. I think they all have a chance. And again, having that leadership ahead of them should only be a good thing.
Other note that I picked up just talking to a couple defensive backs yesterday when I was asking which of the new guys was the best smack talker, it was sort of a leading question because I figured they were all going to say Johnny Dixon, my new favorite South Carolina Gamecock. But it seemed like Shiloh Sanders. I mean, again, that's not like overly surprising given who his dad is. My money was on Johnny, though. But again, that was my other biggest takeaway from the defensive backs. Chris, who'd you talk to yesterday that caught your eye, either physically or just in terms of what he was talking about?
I think I was curious to talk to Ortre Smith, to see just talk to him a little bit about the process of recovering from his knee injury. So he was a guy that played in 2017, played well. I think he caught 4 touchdowns as a true freshman, so he got plenty of burn. And last season, that he had the sublux kneecap, which is a genetic condition with his knee.
It sounds awful, by the way.
Sounds awful. Lots of pain. His mom had it, so it was a genetic thing. And ended up having surgery for that early in October, and was basically laid up for 6 weeks. No walking, crutches and things like that. But, just talking to him about that process, it was a tough deal for him. But, he said his mindset was just to try to dominate his rehab and try to get back out there. So spring ball, obviously he missed, but he was out there jogging around and things like that. And then he was able to return this summer, and do, passing skeleton and things like that with his teammates, with the quarterbacks and defensive backs. And said he was tentative, with the knee at first, but that he feels good. And so it's good for South Carolina and for Ortre to get him back healthy, because behind those top 2 receivers of Shi Smith and Brian Edwards, they need some of the guys to emerge, whether it's Josh Vann or some veterans like Dreek Davis, Chavis Dawkins, Chad Terrell, and Ortre certainly will be in that mix, I think.
And when we're talking about health, one of the other things Will mentioned in his press conference yesterday is just that this is maybe the first time in his career at Carolina that Dreek Davis has been healthy, which is encouraging because the coaching staff has always spoken so highly of him, and Carolina fans have only gotten to see him just in little blips here and there. So that's certainly someone that I would expect to factor into that rotation for who's going to be sort of your third receiving option. Wesley, same question. Who caught your attention, either just in terms of how he looked physically or in terms of what y'all talked about?
Yeah, I'm going to go straight back to the receivers myself. I just, I said this to you when we were standing out there. I got a good feeling about Josh Vann. From some comments preseason from Will Muschamp, and generally he just, like I said, you got to wade through coach speak and non-coach speak. But, if Muschamp brings up a guy just to brag about him, as opposed to, sometimes a coach is going to say some positive things if he's asked specifically about someone. But if he brings up someone just to sort of brag about him, the way Muschamp talked about Josh Vann at SEC Media Days, Brian Edwards talked about him, glowingly there too. I talked to Brian a little bit more yesterday about Josh Vann, and, talked to Shi Smith about him too. And, Shi sort of half-jokingly, said that he was going to ask Josh Vann for some pointers just because he's seen, progress from the guy. And then talking to Josh, I think, you see that jump a lot of times from freshman to sophomore year as far as just learning everything that goes into succeeding at this level. Weight room and nutrition stuff. It's a big jump from, just waking up, going to your high school weightlifting deal, and, you're lifting, you're maybe goofing off with your friends a little bit. Nobody's telling you exactly what to eat. Nobody's, shoving a protein shake in your face right after. Nobody's teaching you how important all that other stuff is. So, I think Josh sort of catching on to all that has been huge for him. He's gotten faster, he said. He's worked a lot on his route running, he said. You've got an interesting little battle because, Shi Smith and Brian Edwards are starting. There's no doubt about that. But who Chris talked about, Ortre Smith, and then Josh Vann, even though I think ultimately, if Josh is starting, he's probably more of a slot guy, even though he has played outside some. If Ortre's starting, he's probably more of an outside guy. Ortre looked thinner, by the way, I thought. I thought he looked slimmed down, worth mentioning. But,
but still impressive. He's still just a big, he's still thick.
Yeah, and I'm not saying that as a bad thing.
No.
Because I think
my first impression of him as a freshman was, if you told me he was 26, I would believe you.
Yes.
And he still he looks very impressive just standing there in a jersey.
Yeah. Said he was 217.
What was he listed at?
Skeptical.
No, what was he listed at freshman year?
Let me effort that.
I feel like he was listed at 217 then, or around that. But maybe
it does seem like that.
225 or so. He looks, and I don't that if he's 217, then that's probably a good thing because that means that's like repurposed weight that he's dipped down and then probably gained muscle.
220.
220. Okay.
Unofficially.
Yes, I think he looked good, but those guys I think are going to battle it out, even if they're not even specifically at the same position. I think one of those guys is like your third starter.
Yeah, and Vann and Ortre, I think, have a lot of interesting comparisons because they're a year apart, but we both saw flashes freshman year And, for Van, this is only his second year. And then for Ortre, he missed the second year. So this is essentially his second year. But when I was talking to Josh yesterday, sort of like you mentioned, he said just the comfort level. I asked what the biggest difference from last year to this year is. And he says the comfort level, and not even just in terms of the football, but just in terms of the entire experience of being a college athlete, in terms of his, basically ability to organize his life and figure out how to prioritize things and just how to prepare himself. Talked about nutrition and things like that. So I think both of those guys, even though they have, I think, very different skill sets, it's going to be a really, really fun battle.
And I asked I talked to Josh too a little bit and asked him, Taekwon Johnson obviously was a later arrival. So I asked him about Xavier Legette and Kevion Mullins, who were guys that got South Carolina in the summer, and Josh just had a chance to work out with them and see him in 7-on-7s. And he said, athletically, those guys were good, but, that he said when we start getting into camp, it's going to be tough. He said it's going to be difficult because then you're in the playbook and you're out there with the bullets flying and all those types of things, and it's going to be tough. And so I think he was sort of relating that to himself a little bit, that he sort of discovered how tough it was last year. Another thing that didn't come up in our conversation, but, Josh, obviously, nobody had a very good bowl game for South Carolina. You wouldn't really point to anybody and say, man, they played really well in the bowl game. Nobody did.
Virginia did.
Virginia played well. South Carolina did not. And I don't mean to harp on that game over and over, but Josh had some plays that I'm sure he'd like to have back in that game, had some drops and things like that. But coming out of high school, this is a guy that had really good ball skills. I mean, people just raved about it. You could see it on film. His coaches talked about it. And for whatever reason,
we watched him in person.
We watched him in person in camp. Yeah, I mean, he's got ball skills. He's a guy that can snatch the ball out of the air. He's not a bigger receiver, but he plays bigger than his size. So I still think, I feel like, we're sort of in this mode now in society and with football where we got to make a snap judgment on a kid, like as a freshman. And everybody's going to just look at that bowl game. But I still am pretty high on Josh Van's potential.
So football is a developmental game. Is that what you're saying?
It is.
And also, I tend to think that bowl games are the most meaningless games that a football team plays in a given year. I think it's interesting, and Tommy Moody's talked about this a lot on the halftime show, that it's so important because it's sort of how fans remember the season. It's their last taste.
Sure.
And so if you win the bowl game, obviously people are excited for the next season. If you lose the bowl game, people have a bad taste in their mouth. And that is true. But again, I think it's unfair because how bowl games are unless it's a good bowl game, unless it's a college football playoff game, unless it's, Sugar Bowl, Capital One Bowl. Is it still the Capital One Bowl? Is that still what they call it?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. I can't remember. I can't keep track of all the sponsorships except the Bad Boy Mowers Gasparilla Bowl. That's the only one that I'll never forget. But bowl games are almost completely meaningless. So, yes, people are like, oh, well, you see what happens with no Deebo Samuel and Zach Bailey. I don't think that's going to be an indication of what this team looks like this year.
I agree. And I think it's totally fine to be TO'd about how the team played in the bowl game.
Totally.
There's nothing wrong with that.
Be
They played
unhappy with it, but don't
very
let it
poorly.
color your expectations.
You can't project, like, when people are projecting it onto everything. Well, I'll say this. The way that South Carolina, losing the Belk Bowl in that fashion, which was embarrassing and bad, all those different things, is not going to have any bearing on the long-term trajectory of the program. Like, if South Carolina ends up, not doing so well over the next 3 to 5 years, won't be because of the bowl game. If they end up doing very well over that same time frame, won't be because of the bowl game. And same thing if they won the bowl game. If they would have beaten Virginia 28-0 or beaten them by a touchdown, whatever.
You'd be like, oh, it doesn't matter. You don't Virginia.
You can't project. You can't say, well, they didn't beat Virginia, so there's no way they can beat this team this year. Or you can't say, well, we would, South Carolina would be doing so much better in recruiting if they would have beat Virginia in the bowl game. It doesn't have that big of an effect. And I think you're right. It's because it's the last game of the year. That's sort of all you have to carry over the entire season.
Anybody else that y'all didn't get a chance to talk about that stood out yesterday during the player media availability?
I don't think so.
No funny anecdotes? Did either of you get a chance to ask Donnell about his burgeoning country music career?
No, but apparently, well, I will say this. Sorry, Brian. Brian Edwards, he likes Coldplay a lot.
Does he really?
Yeah, never would have. he likes Coldplay and some Maroon 5, which I like some Maroon 5
yeah, why
too,
are you apologizing on his?
He just, I mean, he said, he was like, this is something nobody really knows about him. So,
but you're saying, but you're almost like acting like
that's a bad thing,
right? Yeah, so you don't like
those
Coldplay?
Are both well-liked bands.
No, I mean, I like Coldplay. I just, the way he said it, he was like, nobody really knows this.
Like a guilty pleasure thing.
Yeah,
kind of like how Jimmy Butler, it was a guilty pleasure for a long time, or I guess it was unknown outside of locker rooms. Jimmy Butler like blasts country music before all games, and it makes a lot of his teammates mad because apparently a lot of his teammates don't like country music. But so Coldplay is actually one of my two least favorite bands ever.
Okay, so you don't like Coldplay.
So I don't like them, but for me to say that, I think is unpopular. For Brian to say that, I think it makes sense. That's cool.
Also, he said Donnell is by far the best chef on the team.
Yeah, I asked Hank Manis the same thing.
Yeah,
he said that everybody learns their
yeah.
chef techniques from Donnell.
Because Donnell will go out and actually fish, and catch it,
cook the
then
fish,
clean it, and then cook it, and then serve it. So
it's fresh.
You ain't getting, that's pretty good service right there.
Yeah, that's really nice. The players, I think, have had so much fun with that. When we got our tour of the Long facility, talking to the staff there, they talked about how much the players liked it, and then asking a couple of them about it yesterday. That's so fun, and I would have loved that in college.
What's your best dish?
Mine?
Yeah. We'll go around the room.
Yeah, I don't make the same things a lot. I like to try new things, but my go-tos, I've gotten my Merg Machni's gotten really good. My butter chicken, got a really good butter chicken recipe. I don't know if y'all like Indian food.
And that's called Merg Machni?
Merg Machni, yeah.
Okay. Wes, you've heard of that?
No.
Okay. Just making sure.
What's yours?
Trying to think. Also, so I asked Josh Van that too. He said his best dish were burgers that he learned to make. He said he didn't cook at all before he got here, but learned to cook, from Kristen Coggins. I guess we should mention her because she's, implemented that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I was trying to think. I think Brian, God, what did he say? I don't remember what he said his best dish was. I know he said, but Donnell doesn't just cook fish. Like he said spaghetti, all types of stuff. My best dish, probably just a steak. I like to cook, and I cook them all different ways, like reverse sear. I've been doing the sous vide.
I was gonna say, you have a sous vide?
Yeah,
that's awesome.
Yeah, but that with some risotto and some asparagus is like my.
It's really nice.
Money meal
really
right
good.
there.
Yeah, Manos is a big steak guy. He said he likes to butter baste his.
Yeah,
that's the pro move. Get a little cast iron,
yeah,
clove of garlic, a little bit of thyme, and just baste that.
The key to the steak though too is if you put some salt on it like prior and just let it sit
room temperature.
Yep, and then
it draws out the moisture.
Yeah, let the moisture come out, but then let it seep back in there, and then make sure you pat it dry because you don't want it to be like essentially boiling the top of the steak.
Yeah, that's how you get the nice crust on the outside, and you season it, get the inside all good, and goes ahead. It starts to break down those proteins.
I'm in for that.
It's good stuff. Now,
we got to stop talking about.
Yeah, we got.
What's yours? You just ate. You can't. You're not allowed to be hungry. I haven't eaten today. I'm allowed to be hungry.
Shrimp and grits.
Ooh,
I can do pretty well.
That's good.
I would have to say
that's a delicacy around these parts.
Mm-hmm. I'd have to say I can do that one pretty well, Charleston style.
Cool.
Yep.
So we're gonna have to have a potluck dinner, and
yeah,
Wes will make steak. I'll make butter chicken, and you bring the shrimp and grits.
Sounds good.
That'll be fun. At the next Gamecock Central event, we're gonna cook for all you guys.
All right.
You went to practice this morning.
Yep.
How was it? Was it fun to be out there?
Yeah.
Because I used to get so excited when practices were open, or the first however many, when Spurrier was here. I'd go to Bojangles with my brother. It was already celebration time, and we'd just go sit out and watch the first practice, or my friend Joe or something. It was great, and obviously I don't get to do that anymore. I guess I could still go because I'm media. I could go to the first 15 minutes, but it's not the same.
Well, we didn't see a single play ran.
You just saw people running around?
Yeah, I mean, we saw a little bit of a depth chart, sort of. Quarterbacks throwing into a net, guys, getting loose, some kicking, offensive line doing drill work, defensive line doing drill work on the side. Literally no actual offensive plays.
Yeah,
so,
but don't downplay the importance of a quarterback throwing into a net. Chris, how many times do people watch your video of Ryan Helinski throwing into a net at spring practice?
I mean, probably the most viewed thing I've ever produced on Gamecock Central. That or the update on the turf that year before the concert.
concert.
You remember that?
Yeah.
20 million views probably. on
just
turf.
a rough estimate.
I'd spend hours like slaving over something or working on some story. Nope.
Nah. How's the turf?
How's the turf doing?
All right. Well, did y'all take away anything meaningful from this morning?
Man, it's hard. I don't want to say no, but God.
But no.
No, it's.
Well, you said you saw AJ Turner run out there with the first
team nickel. I mean, that's interesting.
That's very interesting.
But
because I asked Will Muschamp yesterday just about how he was splitting time, and he gave me like a real kind of non-answer. It was sort of wherever the team needs him most. But if he's running out there as the first team nickelback on August 1st, that's probably not going to change much before the first game.
I mean, we'll see. Because R.J. Roderick was out there with the second group, so that's not R.J. Roderick's starting somewhere. Let's be honest. So. I don't know how much the day one depth chart means, but certainly I think as far as their vision for him, and you started looking at the second and third group, it's all freshmen. So as far as defensive backs go, so the need for an older guy like AJ over there is, I think, pretty strong.
Chris, anything? Is there anything this morning?
No, I mean,
just give me a morsel, man.
No, the biggest thing, yeah, I mean, that's what stood out. Really looking at the secondary, because I didn't see any surprises. And again, this is day one depth chart, and depth chart used loosely as a term because it was just really them practicing some alignments and some shifts and things like that is where we saw it. So there weren't any real surprises with that. But, just seeing sort of where they had guys slotted in the secondary with Turner at the nickel spot, because he played some corner, in the spring, obviously, when they did that, and seeing Shiloh and Jamie out there, just sort of seeing where they slotted those guys.
How'd the freshmen
really
look?
No surprise.
Did they look ready, like physically? Did they look like they need to add 15 pounds?
No, I don't think so. No, I mean, those are, out of those guys, I mean, Jamie's always been pretty put together.
Mm-hmm.
They're
all listed at like 6'1", 190, but it's always difference between what's listed and what they actually look like on the field.
Yeah, I mean, Johnny Dixon would be the quote unquote smallest one of them, but it's not like you look at him and go, oh, he's too small. He's a cover corner. But I thought those guys, look the part and just watching them move around, but there's not much you can tell from that. But we've seen those guys in camp and things like that before during the recruiting process, and I thought Derek Boykins looked impressive physically.
I thought Ja'Kai Moore looked the part.
Ja'Kai Moore, Jalen Nichols. I mean, you almost forget how young he is just because he's been here, since spring. He's been here a while, but both those guys look really good too. I agree.
All right. Well, I guess that'll about do it, unless there was anything else for media day yesterday or practice this morning that you guys want to get to. But we'll be back next week. We'll have a few more practices. Well, they will have a few more practices under their belt. Hopefully we'll have a few more nuggets to really, really help get us to football season, because this is simultaneously like the most fun part of the year because it's exciting because football season's starting, but it's also just grueling because every day is slower and you just want more football. And you want it to like really be football season, but it's not quite. But regardless, we'll be back next week with whatever news, notes, and nuggets we pick up over the course of the next week or so. And if you guys want to support the podcast, the best way to do that is to rate, review, subscribe, share it with your friends, anybody else that that likes Gamecock football. They will probably be interested in this. Also, because it's the first month of practice, great time to be an insider. Use the exclusive code GCPOD if you're not already subscribed to Gamecock Central to get 1 month of that for free.
Actually, we've got another deal going on now for anybody, too. $75 for a year. So that's 25% off, essentially. Plus, if you sign up right now, the code is on our front page. You will also get a $75 gift card to the Adidas store.
Ooh.
So basically, you spend the $75, which is already discounted, and you get $75 back just in Adidas gear. But you can buy anything with that gift card on the Adidas store.
All right, that's an amazing deal, 1. 2,
yes.
I mean, you should subscribe to Gamecock Central because if you don't, you're a pleb. And don't be a pleb. And 3, Adidas gear is awesome. I just recently, per my brother's recommendation, I know we probably got some soccer players listening to this, Chris. I know you're a soccer player. And even if you're not a soccer player, I imagine this goes for all their socks. But their soccer socks are unbelievable. Chris, have you ever worn Adidas soccer socks?
I have not.
Oh, my gosh.
I'll have to check those out.
I just bought some the other day, and it was like, I was like, okay, it's a soccer sock. Like, what's the difference going to be? And I put it on my foot, and it was was like life-changing. It was incredible. So anyways,
Very nice.
Go get some Adidas socks with the $75 you get for signing up for a year of Gamecock Central for just $75. That's awesome. Also want to encourage you to check out Part 2 of Under Carolina Skies' first episode, Black Magic, an oral history on the 1984 football team. Part 2 is up today. If you haven't listened to Part 1, that's obviously still up, and you should listen to that first because Part 2 picks up exactly where Part 1 left off. And I guess that'll do it for Wes, for Chris. I'm Pearson Fowler. We'll talk to you next week.